everyone. I'm Helena Yu. I'm a thoracic medical oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. My research focuses on EGFR mutant lung cancer. So EGFR exon 20 insertion positive lung cancer is about 2 to 3% of all lung cancers. Right now we have one targeted therapy approval. It's called amivantamab. It's an EGFR MET bispecific antibody. It's approved for the first-line use with chemotherapy or as a single-agent monotherapy in the later-line setting. It's effective, and we're glad to have that option. There are some EGFR MET directed toxicities, and currently there are no oral treatments that are approved in this space. There was originally a phase 1 study done that was looking at safety but also dose finding for this zipalertinib, which is an oral EGFR exon 20 tyrosine kinase inhibitor. And so from that study, we knew that the dose to move forward was 100 milligrams twice daily, given orally. And so that was the dose that we wanted to use in this phase 2 study. We initially looked at this drug post-platinum-based chemotherapy, but with the recent approval of amivantamab, we also wanted to see if this drug was effective post-amivantamab. And so the cohorts included in the study really were based on prior treatment. So there were a group of patients that had only received platinum-based chemotherapy and no prior exon 20 targeting drugs. And then there was another cohort that received platinum-based chemotherapy, amivantamab, or other EGFR exon 20 targeting drugs. We were pleased to see that the results from the phase 1 study were recapitulated in this phase 2 study. So for the patients that had prior chemotherapy only, but no prior exon 20 targeting drugs, the overall response rate was 40%, which is what we saw in the initial phase 1 study. And then in terms of efficacy, if patients have received prior exon 20 targeting therapy, it really depends on what type. So for the patients who received prior amivantamab, the overall response rate was 30%, but for people that received amivantamab with another EGFR exon 20 targeting drug, the response rate was lower, about 14%. And I think that makes sense because if you give a medicine very similar to zipalertinib, there likely will be some cross-resistance. But I think what was reassuring and I think nice to see is that there was not that cross-resistance between the EGFR MET antibody amivantamab with the tyrosine kinase inhibitor zipalertinib. In EGFR mutant lung cancer, more than half of patients will ultimately develop brain metastases. And so when we're evaluating potential treatments, we really need to know how efficacious they are in the central nervous system. And so coming into the study, about 40% of patients in all the cohorts did have brain metastases coming in, the majority of them untreated, which I think is important to assess response. And we really saw that the response rate in patients that had brain mets was equivalent to the sort of overall general response rate. And so when that happens, we suspect that there is good CNS penetration of the drug to make the response rate equivalent. There are ongoing studies looking specifically at patients with untreated brain metastases in the REZILIENT1 study. So we will be able to see, specifically CNS activity. I think that right now for these patients, we have amivantamab, which is definitely an active drug. But I think we just want more options for our patients. These patients live longer, and so having multiple treatment options is helpful. I think we really want an oral, well-tolerated treatment option. I think that's what our patients want, something that has less toxicity. There are a couple other drugs that are currently in development too, so I hope that our patients ultimately will have one, if not several options in terms of oral therapies for exon 20. Of course, the number one priority for our patients is they want efficacious treatments, and they really are willing to do whatever it takes, obviously, to live longer with their cancer. But I think a close second to that is quality of life. They want to live well, and I think the vast majority of people are going to prefer an oral therapy that they take at home every day versus an intravenous infusion that they have to come into the clinic for. I think both just the time and financial cost perspective, it's obviously much better to be able to take treatment at home. I'm excited and I look forward to this space because I do think that there are going to be, hopefully in the future, several oral options for patients in this space. And then ultimately it becomes about sequencing, right? I think if we have multiple options, it's how can we sequence them in the way that kind of gives our patients the longest time with disease control. When we see promising registrational phase 2 studies, I think the idea is like what space will this drug ultimately end up? And so there is REZILIENT1, which is a first-line study looking at zipalertinib with chemotherapy. I think one of the questions, and this is similar to what's happened with amivantamab, is can and should it join chemotherapy in the first-line setting, or is this something better, placed after chemotherapy in the second-line setting? And so we will soon see the answers to the sequencing question, which I think will be really important.